It was 1802, and a man by the name of Lord Elgin was in Athens for one purpose: removing the sculptures from the Parthenon and taking them back to Britain. He didn't know this at the time, but his actions would cause a 200-year-old dispute between the UK and Greece about who should keep the Parthenon marbles, more commonly known as the Elgin marbles. I've made another video about the massive explosion that destroyed the Parthenon in 1687. At the end of that video, I mentioned Lord Elgin, how he took the sculptures from the Parthenon a century later, and how they ended up in the British Museum. I took a very strong stance against him, but I do realize the debate is more nuanced than that. Many believe that they should be returned back to Greece, and others that they should stay in Britain. While I still maintain my position, I want to give you the full story of Elgin and the main talking points of both sides, as well as the weaknesses I see in some of the talking points. So who was Lord Elgin anyways? What did he do exactly? And how did the sculptures end up in the British Museum? His real name was Thomas Bruce, and he was the 7th Earl of Elgin, an aristocratic family from Scotland. In 1799, he got an important job as the British ambassador to the Turkish Ottoman Empire. His diplomatic mission was to influence the Ottomans to ally with Britain instead of France. This was a period when British society was very interested in classical art. Many wealthy Brits were going off to Italy and Greece on a cultural pilgrimage known as the Grand Tour, to learn about the classical past. Elgin too was interested in classicism, and Greece at the time was under the Ottomans, so he wanted to take this opportunity to study ancient Greek art. But since he was going to be busy in Constantinople, he hired a team of artists in Sicily and sent them to Athens to study the monuments for him, while he went to Constantinople to start his new job. Originally, he didn't intend to take the sculptures. He wanted his artists to simply study and draw the Parthenon and make plaster casts of the sculptures on it. But the Ottomans were using the Acropolis as a military fort and a neighborhood for the soldiers, so he had to get special permission for his team to enter it. By that point, the Parthenon was heavily damaged from the 1687 explosion a century earlier. In the middle of it was a mosque that the Ottomans built using rubble from the explosion. For 9 months, his artists sat around in Athens, waiting, because Elgin couldn't get them that permission to enter the Acropolis. But then, world events helped him. Around that time, Napoleon invaded Egypt, a province of the Ottoman Empire. The British helped the Ottomans defeat Napoleon and kick the French out of Egypt, so the Ottomans were very grateful to Britain, their new ally. Elgin knew that now he could ask for anything from the Ottomans, so he tried again and managed to get that permission. He also sent bribes to the Ottoman governor of Athens. His artists gained access to the Acropolis in 1801. They could now draw and study the sculptures on the Parthenon from up close, as originally planned, and built scaffolding in order to make plaster casts. The work was directed by Elgin's chaplain and secretary, a man by the name of Philip Hunt. Elgin would send orders to Hunt through letters, and Hunt reported back on the progress. Then one day, Hunt made a request to the Ottoman governor of Athens to remove just one metope, those square blocks of sculpture. The request was granted. It was just one, the best preserved metope, but this became a slippery slope. Hunt realized that the local authorities were easily corruptible. Before long, more and more sculptures were getting removed from the Parthenon. Local Greeks were hired to do the grunt work. And all this was being paid by Elgin, who wasn't doing this on behalf of the British Empire, but for himself. Elgin only made it to Athens to see the job site a year later, in 1802. His intentions had shifted by now, and he most likely wanted to take them back to Scotland to adorn his private estate. Although he did claim later that he wanted to bring them back to Britain in order to elevate the artistic tastes of the British public. Whatever his motivations were, he exploited this opportunity and took as much as he could. By the time he was done, he managed to extract half the sculptures that were still on the Parthenon since the explosion, and he shipped them back to Britain. But then he was hit with a streak of bad luck. One of the ships sank off a Greek island in a storm, thankfully in shallow waters. He had to pay for an expensive rescue operation by hiring sponge divers to lift them from the sea floor. He did manage to rescue them, and successfully got all the sculptures to Britain. But when he finally made it home, he found out that his wife cheated on him with their neighbor. They divorced, and over the next decade, he went deep into debt. His acquisition of the marbles also caused a lot of controversy in Britain, which damaged his reputation and career. And he contracted a flesh-eating disease that devoured his nose and disfigured his face. He ended up selling them to the British government to cover what he spent on getting the sculptures, but received only half of that. And the collection was moved to the British Museum, where it still lives today. Many people consider what Elgin did as theft, and many think what he did saved them from later destruction. I will tell you about both sides of this debate, but first, a quick word about this video sponsor, Private Internet Access. Whether you agree or disagree that he stole the statues, what is for sure is that when you surf the web from an unprotected device, there are bad actors out there trying to steal your data, like companies and hackers. Browsing the web from an unprotected device is like being digitally naked. Your device transmits a lot of data that can be intercepted before the signal even reaches your destination website, especially when you connect from a public Wi-Fi like at a museum cafe. Others can potentially access your data from the same network. That's where a virtual private network comes in. Private Internet Access hides your IP address and protects your data by encrypting it until it reaches your destination website, then encrypting it back. PIA has a no-logs policy, meaning they don't keep your data, they just protect it. If you go to the link in the description and enter the code STREETGEMS, you'll get 83% off, which is just $2 a month, plus 4 bonus months for free, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. I do a lot of browsing when researching my videos, and I go on many different websites, so security is important to me, and for $2 a month, it's kind of a no-brainer. And with one account, I can protect all my devices. When you click the link, you'll arrive at this landing page, where you can grab that deal. And now let's talk about the controversial debate of the Elgin marbles. It's obvious why Greece wants them back. It's Greek heritage. They were created by ancient Greeks, on Greek soil, in Athens. So this is their place of origin. Nobody can dispute that. The Greeks assert that the Ottoman document that granted Elgin permission, called a firman, was questionable. Only this Italian translation of it survived. The original document has now been found in Turkey's archives, so its existence has been questioned. But let's assume that it did. There's a deeper ethical question of whether the Ottomans even had the right to give that permission in the first place. They were the occupying power after all, so did they have the ethical authority to give away cultural heritage that wasn't theirs? Also, the language of the document was a bit vague, and most likely allowed Elgin to take broken pieces that were lying on the ground, not removing the ones still attached to the Parthenon. Elgin pushed the boundary on what he could get away with, because the Ottoman authorities didn't care, so he knew that he could get away with it. Moreover, he abused his power as ambassador. He used his public office for personal gain. There's no doubt that if he hadn't been ambassador, with the right connections, in the right place and time, that he wouldn't have received that permission as a private citizen. He also used bribes to get what he wanted. So was that permission really ethical? Considering all that, Greece views his means of acquiring the marbles as illegitimate, a cultural appropriation by the political powers of the time, and a historical injustice. I have heard the argument being made that Greece wasn't a country yet when Elgin did his work, or that ancient Greece and modern Greece are not the same thing, so the Greeks are not in a place to ask for them back. But this is a weak argument. While it's true that modern Greece was born in 1832, if we go by that logic, then none of these monuments belong to Italy either, which became a modern nation even later than Greece, and no one is saying that about Italy. No matter who controlled this region, there has always been a Hellenic culture here in one form or another. The fact that they weren't a sovereign and independent nation under the Ottomans is the reason why they didn't have the power to stop it. That's why they see it as a historical injustice. For them, it's a matter of reuniting their most cherished monument, a powerful symbol of their nation. This is one of the few examples of a historic artistic collection which has half of it at home and the other half permanently abroad, and one they've been asking for a very long time. probably no other collection arouses as much national passion. The Greeks make a strong point that if you take any famous painting, cut it in half and separate the two halves, it would only make sense to reunite them. It's about putting a masterpiece back together again, in the place where it originally came from. The British Museum claims that Elgin acquired them legally, according to Ottoman laws of the time, and that the firman was real and legitimate. In 1816, when the British government was considering purchasing them from Elgin, there were some doubts raised as to whether he had the rights to have them in the first place. They set up a special committee to question him and other witnesses, to get to the heart of the matter, and to make a final decision. They decided that Elgin did have the rights to the sculptures. The government then purchased them from him at a bargain and displayed them in the British Museum in a temporary room. Then they were moved to a permanent room. Today, much of the British Museum's case rests on the 1816 committee. The British Museum also asserts that it's thanks to them that the sculptures are so well preserved. There have been a few exceptions, but overall, this is a very strong argument. In Elgin's time, the Ottomans were taking marble pieces from the Parthenon and crushing them into dust to make mortar, and they were also breaking pieces off in order to sell them as souvenirs to Western tourists coming on the Grand Tour. 20 years after Elgin, the Greeks rose up against the Ottomans, and the Greek War of Independence broke out. The Greeks besieged the Ottomans on the Acropolis. Running out of bullets, the Ottomans dismantled some columns in order to get to the ancient lead clamps that were connecting them at the joints, and melted them into bullets. In order to save the Parthenon, the Greeks supplied them with free bullets so that they would leave the Parthenon alone. Some damage was also done to it during World War II and during the Greek Civil War. And in the 20th century, Athens developed into one of the most polluted cities in Europe. The smog has permanently altered the surface of the sculptures that remain on the Parthenon. We can easily see this when comparing a frieze in London and a similar one in Athens. So yes, keeping them in the British Museum definitely preserved them. In fact, an old talking point the British Museum used to give was that Greece didn't have a proper place of their own to keep them safely. In response to that, Greece built the Acropolis Museum to create a home for the sculptures. It's a state-of-the-art museum in the heart of Athens, facing the Parthenon directly. By doing this, Greece eliminated that talking point. The Greeks themselves actually removed most of the sculptures that were still left on the Parthenon and moved them into the museum for safety. But unlike Elgin, they did this in a professional, surgical, and delicate manner, compared to Elgin, who did the opposite, and basically hacked them off the Parthenon. While being questioned by the 1816 committee, Elgin claimed that he did this to save the sculptures, which he saw were being neglected and even desecrated by the Ottomans. While it's true that the Parthenon was being slowly destroyed, I would question his altruistic motives. I'm sure there was an element of that, but I would argue that personal gain was the bigger motivation. First, work began in 1801, and Elgin didn't get to visit the job site until 1802. This means that he gave the order to start removing before he saw the site with his own eyes, and whatever desecration or neglect was taking place by the Ottomans. Second, he didn't take them to a public institution like a museum. He kept them for himself. Third, he removed the sculptures in a violent manner which damaged the Parthenon. In order to get to the metopes, his men toppled over the cornices that were sitting on top and let them drop to the ground and smash into pieces. And then the men chiseled violently along the edges of the metopes in order to extract them. Sculptures that had too much marble on the backside to carry off were simply sawed in half. He doesn't give off the impression of an art lover who respects ancient heritage, but of a crude treasure hunter who only wants these sculptures as trophies. And for the cherry on the cake, he took one of the caryatids from the Erechtheion and replaced it with a column of bricks. Nice touch, Elgin. Nice touch. The British Museum also has the fear that if it grants Greece their request, it will set a precedent and other countries will come knocking on the door for their treasures, and it'll be the beginning of the end for the British Museum. I can definitely understand that anxiety. This point sheds light on what they're actually afraid of. It would definitely open up a Pandora's box, not just for the British Museum, but for other museums as well. The topic of European colonial powers taking ancient treasures from around the world has its historical wrongs. But in many cases, these treasures wouldn't have survived if they weren't taken and kept safe in museums. There is one potential solution, however, a permanent loan. This solution proposes giving them back on an indefinite loan, with the British Museum maintaining stewardship but never asking for them back. This could be a good solution because it would allow the British Museum to save face. It would also quell their anxiety about other countries knocking on their door, because officially they're not relinquishing stewardship. But Greece would need to agree to a clause that the British Museum is the owner of the sculptures. And naturally, this is a bitter pill Greece might not be willing to swallow. I personally would like to see them reunited with their family in Athens, even though it would leave behind a big hole in the museum, which would be sad as well. But maybe they can make plaster copies to put in their place. I hope they can find a solution that works for everyone. Here's a summary of both arguments. What do you think? Let me know your opinion in the comments, and please subscribe to my channel.